I think we know who's pretty popular here if you just look at the audience and everybody's sitting there. So we're not going to waste any time. I'm going to hand the mic over to General Lundy. After he's finished, we're going to have the soft contingent with Colonel Hertzendorf and Colonel Heitkamp. Here you go, Mike.
Thanks, Howard. Okay, first question. Go ahead. Yeah. I want to put you out of work. No. Okay, the question was about less teeth, or actually less tail, more teeth. Now, and it really does get down to, as we think to the future, that's not to say that maintenance is not important. It absolutely is important. It's critical to what we're doing. But how do we reduce the structure behind that and the number of people through either better system design that's easier to maintain, better trainability, providing capabilities to soldiers like today. I mean, if you look at some of the systems that our soldiers use today, it's more work to use the system sometimes than it is to go manual. So we want to look at, as we develop future solutions on how we manage aviation maintenance, those need to be very intuitive. I would tell you, if you go down to the local, store where you're going to buy, I won't use brand names here, you're going to buy a phone. If somebody had to give you a CFSR to go with that phone, you probably wouldn't bring it home. So that's what I'm talking about. How do we reduce the tail? And obviously getting more efficient systems on how we move parts and those kind of things, and reduce the number of tasks. I mean, if you look at some of our system tasks right now, what we ask our soldiers to do, we have pretty thick manuals. The 23 series is pretty thick. So how do we reduce the size, the number of those tasks, and make things more intuitive so we can kind of become skill-based as opposed to task-centric? Does that get after your question, Mr. Anderson? Okay. It was a good question, though. Yes, sir. Okay, so the question is why are we not looking at, an unmanned system that might have 1/5 the maintenance hours? Well, here's what I would tell you. Number one is we've got a certain amount of structure, and there are certain missions that unmanned systems are not going to perform. And frankly, what I'm seeing right now is our unmanned formations are bigger than our manned formations. They are. And we can't afford to put that much structure in that much unmanned. We got to achieve a balance. So we look at all of those capabilities, but certainly we're always looking for more efficient, more effective systems that are easier to maintain. There's no doubt about it. Cool. But I talked about that earlier. Our unmanned formations need to be more unmanned. Just because they're unoccupied, okay, doesn't mean that they're not, unmanned. You look at a shadow platoon right now that has 4 vehicles in it, and it's got 28 people. You look at a Gray Eagle company that's got 10 or 12 vehicles in it, it's got 170 people in it. That's a lot of structure. They're great capabilities. They're capabilities that we absolutely have to have. But as we look to the future, how do we reduce that? Same thing in our manned formations. We want to make our manned formations to where we can put more capability in there with less people. And those are things that we all need to be driving towards from a technology perspective as we look to the future. I don't think that that's unreasonable. I think that that's reasonable and the right way we need to go. So I think we're pretty good now. We can definitely be better. Cool? Yes, ma'am. Mm-hmm. Right. Right. Yeah. Yeah, okay, so the question is about DVE and where we're going in the future. So really for us to have game-changing capability, if we can fight in any environment, okay, whether it's a visual environment or a physical environment, because even though the program is degraded visual environment, when I talk about capabilities, we're talking about all environments. So we're talking about being able to dominate in any threat environment, in any physical environment, so up in the mountains, in the jungles, in the deserts, dependent, temperatures in the Arctic. And then certainly in the visual environment, whether it's dust, whether it's rain, whether it's snow, those capabilities, we want to have better capability than we have today. I mean, night vision goggles, thermal systems brought us a lot of capability. We've got unmanned sensors that are out there that use a lot of technologies that can see, GMTI, moving target indicators, things like that. How do we synthesize and fuse all of that for us to be able to visually fight? And it's not just being able to fly, it's actually being able to employ weapons, acquire targets, and defeat threats. And so as we think to the future about reducing complexity, So we need sensors that will not only see the environment or see through the environment, but we need sensors that will detect threats, and we need sensors that will help us acquire targets. We don't need 3 different sensors on the aircraft. Now, these sensors might be a combination of multiple technologies, and they probably will, but we certainly can't, we don't have enough space on the skin of the aircraft and the weight capacity to have an ASE solution and a target acquisition solution and a DVE solution in the future. Now, right now, we're kind of moving towards that because we're bolting all this stuff on the aircraft, but eventually we've got to get to where we have common sensors that do all of those things. So it's an integrated, a fused approach, and that's where we're driving industry right now, and that's where the requirements are going. But I think from a DVE perspective, that's game-changing. Our ability, right now, we have limitations in what kind of environments we can fly in. Everybody in the world does. And we want to reduce those limitations, get them down as low as we can. Do I think we'll ever get to 100% where we can fly in every degraded visual environment? Probably not anytime soon. But I think we can really take a big chop out of the times that we are limited today. And we've got a lot of technology, and it really is kind of a 3-legged stool that's out there. It is the flight symbology that the crew has to fly off of. We've made a lot of really good progress on that. I think that technology is getting very close to fielding capability. It's flight control, so the precision of the aircraft to be able to fly and accept the crew's input to be able to react. And then it's certainly being able to see in that visual environment. And I would tell you, all of that's got to have the right power on the aircraft too, because when you get into degraded visual environments, you want to have a lot of power. That allows you a lot more room for error. It's a good question, though. Yes, ma'am. Well, okay, so the question's about testing on DVE. There have been a number of, there's a continuous process that we're doing from an assessment perspective, and we have a number of technologies that are out there right now. I mean, we're flying the flight symbology almost routinely now in some of our testing. So out of that 3-legged stool that I talked about, it's kind of a continual assessment. What we were really looking at, the strategy that we did have and that we've changed, was initially we were going to go after a brownout rotorcraft system, something that was really focused on landing and taking off, and it was really geared towards first trying to solve the problem for the medevac crews, because they're flying in a lot of, they're going to go out when the weather's at its absolute worst, because they're going out there to pull, an injured soldier off the battlefield. So that was the initial concept, and then later we were looking at an FVL to think about going to a full DVE. I want to pull that forward and go much earlier, because I think the technology is starting to show us that we don't have to wait till 2031, 2032 when we field our first FVL. I think we can get it on our current aircraft much sooner. So the bottom line is it's not really that we've got very specific, tests right now. We just ran a summit to where we talked through all of this technology. We've programmed some money much earlier in our plan, in our investment strategy that Ms. Hsu talked about earlier, to where we're going to go after that. We've also received some congressional ads on some money to do some S&T work. So I think we're getting very close to being able to start getting a program of record off the ground, and I want to move much faster on that, so we're writing the requirements documents right now to be able to do that. Well, anytime you buy something, something else comes at risk. So it's a balance across the portfolio. We never have enough money to do everything. So we're focused on the most important stuff. And if you look in those pillars that we talked about, so we're going to continue to modernize our force. So the base modernization of going to AH-64E models, the Mike models and the Victors and the F models, that's our base force that's down there. And we're going to continue to buy those at the rate that we've got right now. But then we're looking at where do we focus the remaining money that's within our portfolio. We're going after power, which is ITEP. That's kind of the focus there, as well as looking at degraded visual environment. That's one that we've added. That's an earlier pull. So there's other places in the portfolio where we've had to move money around and slow down some buys. I'm not going to get into specific details about exactly which programs we've slowed down or sped up, but there's always trades, and it's really about getting after the priorities. And I would tell you those 5 pillars of the priorities are mission command systems, degraded visual environment, going after the power on the aircraft, the training and leader development. That's where we're focused. Go ahead. Wow, that's a pretty broad. So home station training. Well, I think in the near term, as you look at home station training, certainly the Army's taken a pretty aggressive approach. Probably 3 years ago, we were taking too much risk in training support systems. So these are things that, everything from simulations, whether it's our AVCAT or games for training, other simulation capabilities, the integrated training environment, our ranges, how we're doing digital air-ground integration ranges. The Army was taking a lot of risk in those areas because we had so much readiness pressure, and the Chief has reinvested in a lot of those programs. So I think if you look at the combat training centers and what we're doing at home station training, so home station instrumentation, that's a big thing that we're working right now. So we've got instrumented aircraft, not only at home station but at the CTC. So when they're out doing gunnery, you can get some great AAR capability, and we're fielding those kits right now. And how do we integrate the aircraft inside of the integrated training environment to where they can be tracked just like you do at a CTC, so they can participate as a player unit or an entity there. We're doing a lot of work in virtualization. So games for training is a big area that we're doing a lot of work in. We're doing some stuff down at Fort Rucker. And what we've done is we've quit. We had kind of a lot of one-off systems in the schoolhouses. Each different school kind of had their own simulations capability that were different than what we had at home station. We stopped doing that. All of our stuff that we do at Fort Rucker now, you actually have this capability when you get out to home station. So we're training our young captains and our lieutenants on how to use the systems they're going to have to train their soldiers with. So VBS-2 right now, VBS-3 is the Army program of record for games for training. We've done a bunch of work in that from an aviation perspective. And frankly, our new CAV Leaders course that we're calling the Aviation Reconnaissance Leaders course is built around using the games for training model with an in-game exercise in AVCAT. We've also incorporated AVCAT in every one of our POIs down there, as well as our unmanned simulation. So a lot of simulation work is being done to get it concurrent with the aircraft that are fielded, because that's very important. If you're flying in an E-model Apache, you want to have E-model replication. And we've made great progress with that. So I think that's a key piece. The live training piece at home station, I talked about being able to get integrated into the integrated training environment where we can track aircraft. So we're going to put capabilities on the aircraft right now. We've got it sorted out for the 64s. We're still working through the 47 fleet, but I think we'll be okay there. We'll eventually get that straight. And then really, the bulk of it is really on the units and us to be able to get them the right levels of flying hours. To be able to execute a home station flight hour program that's requisite to the training level we expect them to get to. And right now, I'm not satisfied that we're putting enough resources to be able to get to the level of proficiency that I think we need to. We're in pretty good shape, but we can be in better shape. And I'm especially concerned right now in Compo 2 and Compo 3 that we need to up their flying hours a little bit. I think, and again, it's pressure across the board. I mean, this is what sequestration and the Budget Control Act have done to us to have to make these very hard decisions. So this is not. We're not paying a bill for something else at the expense of training. I mean, we're having to make some very hard draconian decisions, and there's not a lot of room out there for, the Department of the Army to maneuver when it comes to these budget cuts. And I mean, it really impacts readiness first. And I think the Chief's testimony and the Secretary of the Army's testimony is very clear about what the impacts on readiness are for the sequester and then the BCA cuts that we've taken prior to that. So I don't think that's news to anybody, and it's certainly a concern for me. And you can see it, with the CAB commanders, they're concerned about it as well, because as busy as we are, I mean, you can't just decide, that, hey, I need to be able to do a night air assault tonight. You can't just pull one of those out. I mean, you got to train for it. So, and it's, and the department's tracking, the chief's tracking, and that's part of his testimony he's been talking about is why we're at so much risk right now from a readiness perspective. If the sequester hits in 16, we're going to see it go down. I mean, we just got readiness back up because Congress gave us some additional resources to be able to do that. But if the sequester comes in, that's going to impact readiness directly. And I think the chief's been pretty clear in this, and so is the vice. I mean, you can look at any of the testimony with any of the senior leaders of the Army. So not something Mike Lundy's bringing out. I mean, I think it's pretty clear that they're concerned. Yeah. Okay, so the question is, how do we maintain, from an expeditionary perspective, how do we maintain that linkage to our partners that are out there? And I would tell you that it's, from a multinational perspective, so we got to look at this from multiple perspectives, areas of concern. So SOF, special operations, conventional force interdependence. I think we've shown over the last 13, 14 years that there's an interdependence there. So that's certainly an area we've got to be concerned with. Multinational partners. I mean, we're not doing anything right now that we're not partnered. And then you think about, we don't deploy unless we're multi-compo. I mean, 50% of the aviation's combat power is in the Guard and Reserves. And so as we look at these future deployments, just as we have for really the last 13 years, we've mostly deployed multi-compo because we're tailorable for the mission. So all of those things, as deployments come down, the risk is how do we maintain those relationships? So I would say if you look in Europe, I can talk to the multinational piece. I just got back from Germany and Poland a couple of weeks ago, and if you look at what General Hodges is doing in USAACE, the amount of multinational operations that are going on in Europe is pretty phenomenal. And it's probably at a pace that we haven't been at in the past necessarily from a peacetime perspective. At the Joint Multinational Training Readiness Center, JMRC, I mean, they're running 10 to 12 major exercises a year that are all multinational. So I think that's a great capability. If you look at the Mission Command Training Program, we're doing a lot of work with the UK and the Canadians at the operational level, as well as the Army warfighting experiments that are going to go on down at Fort Bliss. Those are going to be joint and multinational as well. So I think from a multinational perspective, along with the deployments that we're doing and the fact that we're still deployed in Afghanistan, Kuwait, and Iraq, I mean, I think we've got a really good approach from a multinational perspective. The SOF, conventional force interdependence, that one's going to be a tough challenge because our SOF forces, we're all very busy right now, and if we're not busy deployed together, we end up on potentially opposite ends of the spectrum there. So we're looking a lot at how we fully integrate SOF and conventional forces in exercises, specifically at the CTC programs, but also at home station as well. Cool. Go ahead. Roger. That might be a question you want to ask Ms. Hsu, but so I guess the question is how much, with our partners, how much do we look at from a technology development and requirements development? And I'm certainly, we've got a bunch of multinational partner LNOs that are down there at Fort Rucker with us, and we certainly look at what requirements are out there. So we have a lot of engagements from a requirements perspective to understand what our partners are looking for in capabilities. So, I mean, I don't think that's going to change. How much technology we share and stuff, I mean, that's somebody else's lane to get into. But from a requirements perspective, I think it's very important for us to continue to talk together and make sure that, as we develop capabilities out there, we certainly want capabilities that are going to complement each other. And there are things that our partners are developing that are, we need to be looking at, and the same thing. So, I mean, I think that's going to certainly continue. And in fact, it might be, it's probably more important now than it ever has been, because of the interdependence that we do have. Does that get your question? Sort of? Yeah, okay. Oh, well, yes, sir.
You said the more technology you have,
Right. Right. Yeah. Okay, so the question is, based on how complex our systems are, and I see Bob Marion back there in the back, so I may throw this question at him. You should not have shown up, Bob. But no, I think your question is very good, though, and the question really centers around predictability of funding and how do we maintain an industrial base. I think that's what you're asking me. So, right, and to be able to deal with all the contractual rules and stuff. And I would tell you that if you look at the chief's testimony and the vice's testimony, they've been very, very loud about we need predictable funding because Yes, there is bureaucracy you have to deal with as you build programs and systems, and as you deal with all the different companies and corporations. I mean, there's got to be a level of predictability out there for stockholders, and we need a level of predictability, to be able to get the best value for our dollar. So certainly predictability and resourcing, and that's one of the reasons why, the sequester is going to cause us so many problems. And so certainly there's been a lot of discussion about, potential ways to solve those issues, but ultimately, things like the sequester, things like, continuing resolutions, those all generate unpredictability in our funding streams. And even though, I'm very interested in how much money we have and what kind of impacts it has, I think, certainly General Marion can talk with a lot more fidelity of what those impacts are. So I would ask you when he gets up here, you can throw him that question, and he will actually probably give you a more detailed, cogent answer than I did. But I think predictability is very important. Did I do okay on that one, Bob? Oh, okay. Well trained. All right, so if there's no more questions, you guys have a good day. Okay, well, all right. I was going to see if anybody's going to ask.
I'll go back to a maintenance question that started
Sure.
this all out. Could you give us a status update on the aviation maintenance career track for commissioned officers?
Right. Okay, so the question is the 15 Delta program. So the 15 Delta program is back, okay, and it is on track. Does that help you? Well, I'm all about succinct. Okay, the question's about past progression problems, and it really does get down to, it's not so much the career field, it's what talent we put in there and how we pick that talent. And, if we provide them the right opportunities, which we have within the 15 Delta track now, I'm pretty confident, then we shouldn't see a progression problem. Yeah. Oh. Dan? I've got some questions for you, but I don't think that's what this forum's for. What else? You guys are like way too easy. Y'all are just waiting for General Marion? Go ahead. Okay, so the question is the future Scout aircraft. So from a requirements perspective, we have a valid requirement for a future Scout aircraft. Okay, that still remains valid. I've been clear about that, and so is the chief. As we look to the future, right now, based on our funding lines and all of that, we're going to use the AH-64, use a man-unmanned teaming as our interim Scout. And then as we look to the future and future vertical lift, we're going to develop a Scout platform and future vertical lift. If something materializes earlier than that, then we're always, we're going to be agile enough that we can go after it. But it's going to have to be able to meet the requirements, and the requirements haven't changed. Does that answer your question? Okay. And it's going to have to meet the requirements within an affordable budget. Go ahead. Link 16. Okay, so that's a good question for General Marion, but I will throw my hat into Link 16. We're going to buy Link 16. We're actually going to put it on all of the E models, and frankly, we've got to put it on more than just the AH-64Es, but that's going to be the first place where we enter with Link 16. So we are continuing. We basically just did a test with it down there at Eglin. Worked very well. So we are moving ahead on Link 16. But again, that gets back to that joint connectivity. Think about the mission command piece. One of the pillars, Link 16, soldier radio waveform, which is our ability to talk to the new capability sets that are fielded out there in the BCTs, and basically the wide area network. Those are all things that we're, the mid-tier that we're looking at from a mission command pillar that we've got to do. So it's a good question. Good. No questions from JRTC? No? Oh. Is there any other questions? All right, going. Go ahead. Okay, the ARI Commissioners. Wow, if I can remember them all by name, I would tell you what. I think I can remember most of them, but I'd probably goof it up. So if you really want to know who the ARI commissioners are, I could put you in touch with our liaison to the up there in the headquarters DA, and then they can give you the whole what's in the NDAA and all of that other stuff about what the commissioners are supposed to do. I can tell you broadly, but there's specific language that's in the NDAA that lays all that stuff out. So I would rather have those guys just give you, no kidding, here's the excerpt out of it and here's who's on it, and then you got all the facts. Okay? Because I'm sure I'll leave something out. Okay, no other questions?
The radio with a lot of button on it.
Right. So getting back to my comment about I just want an ON, OFF button. Roger. It's pretty simple. I mean, I'm a simple guy. I want to be able to turn it on and it works. But now, I mean, as we think about all of these capabilities that we have out there and what we're asking our soldiers to do, if we're going to be outside dealing with this very complex world, because, you can't be so, we equip the soldier. So, and the soldier's the weapon system. So we want them focused on the complexity of the environment that they're operating in, and a part of that environment can't be, the aircraft in the cockpit. I mean, we need to simplify, what they're having to do to make things easier. It can't be 25 button pushes or a lot of memorized steps they need to go to, because I want them focused on thinking about, the enemy that's out there, the threats that are out there. So as we simplify our systems, and sometimes we make fiscal decisions because to make things more easily trainable or to make them more, make them simpler, it becomes more expensive. But, you have to look at the second and third order cost, because if you spend a little bit of money in the material solution, you can reduce the training burden. And I would tell you that, the number of tasks that we have to train and stuff, the more we can simplify technology, simplify our systems out there, we can reduce the training burden at the individual level. We can use those resources to collectively train, because that is the art of warfighting, is to be able to fight at the collective level. And that's what we really want to be focused on in dealing with these very, very complex, unknown, unknowable situations that we're going to have to put soldiers in. We don't want them worried about, I call it texting while flying. We don't want them heads down in the cockpit. So we need to work on that. And that's not just an aviation issue. That's an issue for all technology that we have out there. So if something's really hard to use, they'll spend too much time worried about the technology and not be outside fighting the enemy. Oh, yes, sir. So the safety program to reduce, with the new technology, to reduce accidents. Well, certainly, I talked about DVE, because DVE, it's not only being able to fly and fight, we want to be able to fly and fight the enemy, but it's also going to help us reduce the risk that we put our crews in. I would tell you that ITEP, that's technology that reduces risk. If you've got an arm full of collective that you can pull in to get out of a situation, or like me, who's a 58D driver, it has just a little bit, that matters. So that's why we're going after power. Power is a key, power is survival out there. Your ability to agilely maneuver when in enemy contact, or to be able to work in very confined spaces, which we're going to have to do in environmental conditions that we don't get to pick. So those are two big technology pieces right there. They're going to reduce accidents right there. I mean, power gives us a lot of margins. DVE is going to allow us to fly in environments. But I would also tell you that as we think about things like, JAGM missile, a multi-seeker missile that's got a lot of capabilities. That allows us to maintain, standoff, or to be able to shoot the missile in parameters that we may not be able to shoot another missile in. Again, it reduces risk. So we do, risk is a part of, and we really approach it from an operational perspective. And I think that's the important way to look at where we're taking risk out there. And we often forget that many of the technologies that we have, the fact that we're doing man-unmanned teaming reduces a significant amount of risk, because we've got persistent reconnaissance that can be out forward of manned systems to allow us to more agilely maneuver and have better situational understanding. Link 16, where we're deconflicting between us and the Air Force and other flyers that are out there and other things that operate in the airspace. All of those help us reduce risk. And certainly if we get after trainability to where somebody's not having to put their head down and worry about something in the cockpit, that things are more intuitive and they're more focused outside the aircraft, either flying in the environment or fighting in the environment, all of those are risk reduction measures. And then I talked, as we look out to the future, as we think about future vertical lift and the commonality of cockpits, that when we train aviators, they're not having to go through multiple different kinds of aircraft, that they're learning one aircraft and then they just get the mission set for others. So if we've got commonality in cockpits, commonality in, we can make a gauge read anything we want it to read, so why are our limitations not the same for all aircraft? Those are the kind of things we're working on right now, as we call defragging the hard drive. So, and I think there's a lot of things we can do today that we're going after, and then there's things that we're going to have to wait until we build future new buys, but those are certainly a part of the requirements that we have, but it's a great question. Right. Well, the question is about the new training aircraft, the Lakota, and the question is, how's it going? It's going good. We're training the instructor pilots on it, and it'll be a great trainer. Right. At Fort Rucker, yes. What it'll allow us to do is have one training aircraft. Right now, you have to go to really 2.5. So you start out in a 67, then you have to do the 67 instrument, and then you go into an OH-58. And so where we got one common aircraft throughout, when I went through, I had to go through 5 aircraft. So a very inefficient, ineffective way, and we load up our heads with lots of trying to remember. You can get confused between the different aircraft. So we're making that a little simpler. So they'll go through flight school, and allows us to buy back some flight time and do some other things in flight school that we haven't been able to do in the past. So go ahead. All right, so I got a good question. It's probably going to be the most intelligent question I've gotten all day.
Sir, on the roadmap for MUM-T,
Yes.
How far out do you think it would be for us to actually get full integration with that?
Okay. Are you a 15 whiskey?
Yes, sir.
Awesome. All right. So really, how do we get after MUM-T? What's the future of MUM-T, and how long do we think it's going to take to get there? I would tell you we're doing it today, okay? We've done a lot of work in simulation. We're training it at Fort Rucker, so whenever you go through the 64 course, you're doing MUM-T. We just did an NTC rotation out there. Came out of the guys out of Fort Carson. We had an attack battalion out there. It went very well. We learned a lot, but I think we're getting there now. So I mean, the doctrine's written. We've put it out in the force. We've been doing some variations of MUM-T for a while, but now it's kind of fully codified. So our first units are fielding with their shadows. We've been putting Gragel inside the formation, so I think it's well underway. Oh, all right, great. Go ahead. Yeah.
Is there any plans or talk about combining the IP course and the IE course so we have more trainers in the field, especially at the company level?
Okay. Yeah, combining courses. I would say as we look at defragging the hard drive at the school, and we're thinking about, what is it that we need to be, we're doing a lot of work on changing how we're training our instructor pilots. So we're changing some of the rote MOI stuff that we've got them doing. Certainly, potentially combining the IE course and the IPC, that's something we can definitely take a look at. And that's one of the things the CWAB is kind of doing right now. The Chief Warrant Officer of the branch is taking a holistic look at, what are we instructing in the schoolhouse? What is important that we've got to keep, and what is it that we need to change? Because we've got to think differently about how we train for this future fight. That's a good question. That guy over there has that Tasker. He used to have hair. Any other questions? All right, well, I think I'm out of time. Is my time up? Who's the timekeeper? Oh. All right, so no other, I'll take one more. Or not. Okay, well, thanks. I see a lot of familiar faces out here, but appreciate everything you do every day for Army Aviation. And we are one big team. And you can see just based on if you walk around here and you look at what's going on, we're pretty complex. And our relationship, what industry does for us, what we've got to provide, what we do with our partners, and the great things that our soldiers are doing out there every day. It's pretty remarkable to be able to watch it happen, but none of it's easy. And as we look to the future here, I'm very concerned, as I said earlier, about the sequester, and we've got to try to get some solutions on that, or we're going to have to relook how we're doing things. And we've done enough relooking, so I'm hoping we can get that resolved. But thanks for all of you being here. Appreciate it, and I think.